So, Lord Skrolk needs a little love. No, not from CA, from us, the players. This cute, horned rat-worshipping Plague Lord of Clan Pestilence offers a really unique campaign experience, but is often neglected by us players, passed over in favor of the super powerful Clan Scryer, or ninja-esque Clan Eshin, or monster-making Clan Molder. Nothing against those guys, they're all super fun too. I have to make sure to throw that out there. I don't want an Eshin assassin paying me a visit this evening. But there are things I hear that hurt Skrolk's tender feelings. Like his faction mechanics are boring. His campaign is frustratingly difficult, and he never reaches the godlike power of the other lords. In fact, I'd hazard a guess that if not for Tretch Craventail, Skrolk would probably be widely considered the worst Skaven Lord to play. Just as an aside, yes, I'm working on a Tretch is better than you think video as well, just as soon as I find anything to genuinely like about him. As for those criticisms, there's some truth to them, but well, there's two ways to look at them, and none of them necessarily make his campaign bad. Bear with me a minute and I'll explain what I mean, including some specific things that are important to getting the most out of a Skrolk campaign. Now I know not everyone is like me in one respect. I fell in love with this guy as soon as I watched his menu screen cinematic, swinging that giant flail-like staff around and slamming it down, learning that he was blind but kicks butt in combat anyway, and then finding out he's all about plagues. I mean, what's not to love? But that was then, this is years later, and we have to look at the big picture. As I mentioned, I get the criticism of Skrolk. Much like with Queek Headtaker, Skrolk is one of the original vanilla release Skaven legendary lords, which when taken in the context of the awesome mechanics later given to the DLC Skaven lords like Ikitclaw, Deathmaster Snitch, and Throt the Unclean, I can certainly understand why the vanilla Skaven campaigns pale in comparison at first glance. Nevertheless, I really enjoy the Skrolk campaign, and I'm going to give a couple of reasons why you might want to try him again yourself if it's been a while. I'm also going to mention a few mods that I recommend to liven up the base Skrolk experience if vanilla is still a little too vanilla for your liking. Let's dive right into the important aspects of a Skrolk campaign. So, Skrolk's main unique mechanic is in the use of the Skaven Plague, and yes, it is a pretty simple mechanic. But simpler mechanics does not necessarily mean weaker or less fun, it just means focusing on gritty Skaven tactics instead of things like dropping nukes or eliminating entire factions with one click of a button. The Plague itself, created by the Pestilence scheme, is not unique to this faction. What is unique to Clan Pestilence is that they can produce those plagues much more frequently, and they can proliferate them aggressively because the plague benefits Skrolk's armies and settlements even as it ravages everyone else's. Believe me, these plagues can swiftly change the fortunes of war in Skrolk's favor. Have a nearby enemy walled city that seems impossible to conquer? Hit it with a plague, watch half the garrison, along with any nearby enemy armies, melt away into a much less imposing force. Not only that, but the plagues tend to spread rapidly from one settlement to another, and it's not unusual to see strong enemies utterly emasculated in a matter of turns, and without any fighting. The real trick is in the timing, because the plagues only last a few turns, after which the AI tends to replenish quite quickly. Unlike with Nurgle, the Skaven only get a single plague with which to work. So yes, the mechanic is rather simple. But is it boring? Well, that's subjective, but it certainly has its uses. It's not overpowered, but it is powerful enough that you'll want to engage with the mechanic as often as possible. Not to mention, overpowered is overrated anyway. Personally, I think Ikit's campaign, for example, gets fairly boring fairly quickly because he's so powerful. A Skrolk campaign, on the other hand, provides a real challenge that requires creative thinking to survive and dominate. The mechanics are simpler, but sometimes it's good to get back to basics. I've mentioned in other videos that I'm glad Warhammer 3 factions are not perfectly balanced. Sometimes it's fun to have a challenge. Of course, it helps that I don't play competitive multiplayer, so I'm speaking strictly from a campaign perspective. On that note, Skrolk begins in a rather unenviable position. Starting Skaven units are particularly weak against sturdy opposition with high leadership. For example, I don't know, lizardmen. And guess what Skrolk is surrounded by? Not one, not two, but 3 hostile lizardmen factions, all of whom will declare war on you before you have a chance to build up your defenses or raise some armies with units better able to deal with them. It's not unusual to wind up with an enemy lizardman faction to your south, another to your east, and another to your north. How about to the west, you ask? Well, what else besides lizardmen has sturdy, well-armored units with high leadership? Oh yeah, the dwarfs. Yeah, that's right. You've got dwarfs to your west, and all of those factions hate you and will declare war on you if you let them. And if you let them, they'll often gang up on you and hit you at the same time. So the campaign start can be tricky, but it's not impossible, and boy oh boy does it give you a sense of accomplishment when 15 or 20 or 25 turns in, the jungles of southern Lustria are yours and all those lizardmen and dwarf factions are vanquished. The number one rule of fighting battles with Skaven probably is more true for Skrolk than any other Skaven faction, and that is that they suck at conventional tactics. You cannot fight battles with Skaven infantry the same way you would with greenskins, or elves, or humans, or dwarfs. You get the idea. Basic Skaven infantry have low stats, especially leadership. They're not a match 1-for-1 in most situations, and so you rarely can use conventional tactics like hammer and anvil. Your anvil is more likely to break and run before your hammer can get there. There are maybe a few exceptions. Queek can buff clan rats enough to get some sustainability from a front line, Tretch has his storm vermin for the same, and Thralt can give some nice mutations to his. Skrolk, on the other hand, gives no real benefits to his clan rats beyond what the basic tech tree provides, and so you'll want to rely far more on unconventional tactics in battle. But that's okay, because Skrolk does provide advantages for some units to help with this. The big 3 are Plague Priests, Plague Monks, and Plague Claw Catapults. You'll start out with some of each in your starting force, so you can get used to using them right away. Remember, Plague Monks should not be used as normal frontline troops. They do decent damage and have some damage resistance, but even so are too fragile as line holders. Use them instead as supplemental or flanking units once an enemy is locked down by something else. Skrolk doesn't want to be doing damage with his front line. That's what the Plague Claw Catapults are for. These things can do tremendous damage when used correctly, and so long as you keep the enemy from getting close to them. So how do you do that? Thankfully, Skaven have a few options here. Clan rats are cheap and expendable. You can use the Menace below to summon more, and use Plague Priests to summon even more on top of that. Skaven also have easy access to heroes. A really effective combination is locking up an enemy unit with one chieftain to give your catapults a stationary target with little risk of friendly fire. Just remember that Skaven tactics reward creative thinking. Don't get bogged down in traditional or unflexible tactics. One other note, just accept that your units are going to break a lot. Be ready for them to recover so you can turn them around and send them back into the fighting. If you're a masochist like I am, make sure never to pause so you can experience maximum chaos and confusion. It takes a little getting used to, but it's great fun. Moving on. As previously mentioned, I wanted to name just a few of the many excellent mods out there that add more options, more units, more skills, and the like to vanilla Skrolk. I personally don't think you need these to have fun, but more options is always a good thing to scratch your particular itch and suit your preferences. These are probably mutually exclusive. You wouldn't want to use all of them at the same time, particularly the first one with either of the others. Links to all of these in the description below. The first mod is Skaven Clans by Stradivarius. This is a compilation of all of his Skaven clan mods, and we want this specifically for the Pestilent Brotherhood mod. This adds more features than I can go into detail in this video, but it includes new playable factions, lords, heroes, units, regiments of renown, mounts, and mechanics. Some of these apply to Skrolk, but it also gives some other options to play other Clan Pestilence lords. The second mod is Singe's Skills for Lord Skrolk by Singe. This is a much smaller scale mod that simply adds 4 more skills to Lord Skrolk. These skills double down on what makes Pestilence unique by making Plague Monks and Plague Claw catapults a bit stronger. If you like to stay thematic without overhauling the experience completely, this one might appeal. The third mod is Plague Cauldron feature for Clan Pestilence by Rox. This does exactly what it says on the tin. It gives a limited version of Nurgle's Plague Cauldron mechanic to Skrolk. It also adds an infections mechanic to the faction and allows units to be upgraded using those infections, similar to how the Greenskins scrap system works. So there you have it, my thoughts on how best to enjoy a Skrolk campaign, whether in the vanilla game or using some mods to add anywhere from a little to a lot of spice. If you've made it this far, thanks so much for watching. But also, what are you waiting for? Go start a new campaign with Skrolk. I know I'm going to. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video.